So welcome everyone. Again, my name is Jennifer Thompson and I am the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey and Delaware. And I am so grateful for you to be here with us today to join us for this important community conversation, the School to Prison Pipeline. We are joined by two phenomenal speakers and experts in this area. We have Mary Coogan, the Vice President at Advocates for Children here in New Jersey, and Jasmine Harding, who is a coordinator at the Newark Youth Court and then at Newark Community Solutions. And both of them will be sharing with us their expertise and knowledge and leading us in today's conversation. Before I hand it over to Mary and Jasmine, I just wanted to go over a little bit of housekeeping with you. I will be here moderating today's conversation, and that's what we really hope today will be, a conversation, a knowledge sharing, and an opportunity for you to ask questions and learn as well. There are a couple of ways that you can do so. We have our Zoom chat room, which I think will be off to your right if I'm orienting myself to Zoom rooms accurately these days. You can certainly ask questions in the Zoom chat, but if you have other questions that you would like to ask privately or you'd like me to ask on your behalf, I certainly invite you to chat them directly to me and I will pop in and ask them as well. We encourage you to open your lines up and speak so we can see your faces and chat and have real conversations. So if you'd like to do so, if you could raise your either physical hand or your Zoom hand, you can do that as well. And I will interject at some point and open your line up. Everyone is on mute for today's conversation. So not to worry if your friends, your husband, your children, your dogs, your cats are in the background, we won't be able to hear them. And with that, I am going to turn the conversation over to our leaders today. Mary and Jasmine, thank you both so much for joining us and leading this conversation. We're really excited to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here. As Jennifer said, I'm Mary Coogan and I'm with Advocates for Children of New Jersey, or ACNJ. I wanted to make two, public service announcements. I understand today is the 100-year celebration of women's suffrage. So we want to encourage everyone to register to vote. And if your organization does any outreach in terms of voter registration, we really want to commend you for that effort. It's really important, whether it's on the national level, county level, state level, or very local level. It's important to be an informed voter. The other thing is the census. You can still fill out your census form. And if you have not done so, I would urge you to do that. My office has been doing outreach around the census, and we are aware of many places where we do not have a complete count. And that is critical because that determines everyone's representation in the House of Representatives in Congress. So with that, I'll get started. Just to make sure we're all on the same page. The School to Prison Pipeline, when I refer to that, I am referring to education policies or laws or regulations related to education, which were implemented in order to address what I would put in quotes as bad behavior. But unfortunately, what happens for some youth who their behavior would be addressed by a trip to the principal's office when I was a student, that now winds up getting them suspended or expelled or something more serious and maybe leading to criminal charges, which people of good intent in many instances who wanted to deter bad behavior have resulted in children having criminal records and that having long-term consequences for purposes of applying to college or for getting student loans or even for joining the military service. So that's what Jasmine and I are here to talk about. How did we get here? So my understanding, maybe about 30 years ago, people were very concerned about violence in schools and criminal behavior. And so that led to what we call zero tolerance policies. So a zero tolerance policy is a policy, or it could be a law, such as zero tolerance for weapons in a school building. And that's where people pass laws or regulation or policies to deter bad behavior. But what they were doing is predetermining the consequences for the specific action. So if you had a weapon in school, or now sometimes anything that might be looking like a weapon, even if it's not a weapon, you could be suspended or expelled for up to a year, something that would be very serious. The Gun-Free School Act, I believe, was passed in 1994. another thing was what we call the broken window theory. And that's where people feel if we crack down on small infractions, we will create a better school environment, students will be more serious about their studies, and kids will feel safe. I think sometimes that can work. It has been shown to work in many cities, but in schools it has not really worked, because what's happened is kids might be disrespectful, they might skip a class, and again, they are getting suspended or expelled. And unfortunately, and as many of you probably are aware, the most crime of youth are committed, in the afternoon when they're home from school. So now you have kids who are not in school, who are at home with nothing to do and bored. Their parents might be working. Well, I guess now everybody is home, but at the time when they were supposed to be in school, their parents might be working, and they would get themselves into mischief or trouble, and again, wind up involved with law enforcement. And then we had the massive shootings. So some of you may have read about, or maybe were alive at the time of the Columbine High School shooting, which was, I guess, in the late 90s, which was a horrible thing. And school administrators were very concerned, and parents were very concerned about protecting students in the building from people coming inside with guns. And so we started bringing police into the buildings. Again, well intended to protect the students in the building. But over the course of time, what was referred to as a security resource officer or a school resource officer, they could be active police or they could be retired police. They started being asked to get involved in discipline matters. So a student might be doing something that was wrong or a school infraction, and all of a sudden the principal or administrators or teachers were sending them to the school resource officer, who, if they were a cop and it turned out it did constitute a crime, that student would be referred to law enforcement and again, get involved in the juvenile justice system, which, as I said previously, has all kinds of consequences. So in my office, we really look at data and we look at research, and we try to advocate for policies and programs that we think will help ensure that all children are safe, healthy, and educated. When we looked at juvenile justice issues, and not just us, but many other organizations, started seeing that there was, the outcomes were not what people had intended. And in fact, there had been an increase of kids getting involved in criminal behavior. So back in 2015, we actually worked with a bunch of other stakeholders. And by that, I mean the courts, prosecutors, attorneys who represent kids, educators, and social workers to pull together a group of people to talk about what were the unintended consequences of well-intended people who had implemented a lot of these rules and regulations and laws. And I do recall one of the prosecutors who came out of an urban area, who was very blunt when he said, when he first started in the business, he was thinking that it would be helpful to charge a kid to really make the kid shape up. And what he found was that these kids now couldn't get into the military. They could not fill out an application, not because like juvenile records are sealed, but then they weren't sure if they would be accused of lying if they didn't say it. Or an employer could still find out that they had a record, or their record would come back to haunt them if it involved a drug charge and they couldn't get a student loan. And so people then started looking at data and finding that, unfortunately, maybe because of direct bias or implicit bias, there was an overrepresentation of youth of color in the system. So one of the things I want to share with you is the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights collects data from schools across the country. And I will send Jennifer the link to that, and she can share that with you. You want to look at this data yourself. And so they compile it all, and a couple of things in terms of school safety and climate. So the most recent data they have is 2015 to 16 school year. So for example, while Black youth comprise about 15% of the student population, they comprise 31% of the students who were either referred to law enforcement or were arrested. White youth, who comprised 49% of the population, were about 36% of the students who were referred to law enforcement or arrested. Hispanic or Latino students of any race comprised about 26% of the population during that school year, and were about 24% of the students who were referred to law enforcement. Then they lumped together American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander, or students of 2 or more races. And while those students comprise about 5% of the overall student population, they comprised 8% of the students who referred to law enforcement. And then with reference to disabled students, which many of you probably know, sometimes their behavior can be problematic in a classroom. While they may only represent 12% of the student population, they actually represented 28% of the students who were referred to law enforcement or arrested. So just, I mean, there's a lot more data out there, which, you know, I encourage you to look at, but it is something that is striking in terms of the Black or African-American youth who are overrepresented in terms of the suspensions, expulsions, and referral to law enforcement. So I do think in New Jersey, which is where Jasmine and I are from, there are people who are seriously trying to address some of this, both in terms of what kinds of behavior gets referred and also the implicit or the overt bias. And I'm happy to say that Jasmine, actually, her organization is doing some really cool stuff with kids. And so I'm going to turn it over to her now, and she can talk about her program.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited about this conversation. It's focused on something that our organization really takes pride in, being creative and innovative when it comes to providing services to young people and families. So thank you guys again. So my name is Jasmine Harden. I'm the Youth Court Coordinator for Newark Community Solutions. The Newark Youth Court, we train high school students to hold hearings for their peers who commit low-level offenses. So these students we refer to as respondents. They are ages 10 to 18. And they've come to us because they have committed, the low-level offense: truancy, fighting, bullying, harassment, vandalism, possession of marijuana, possession of a weapon. And they're coming to us as an alternative to suspension, detention, or being arrested. So we serve as an alternative to traditional forms of punishment. We get those cases from the schools throughout the district, so both public and charter, the police department, so the Newark Police Department, for station house adjustments, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And also parents can refer to our program, community-based organizations, and the truancy court program that's located at the Newark Municipal Court. So we really take pride in our partnerships and really coming to the table with, a team of, school staff members or the detectives that we work closely with to figure out the root of, why this young person is being referred to us and what we can do to provide services. So there's one side of it where it's this experience piece, right? We're empowering this young person to sit on the stand and tell their story to their peers who have, 9 times out of 10 been in the same situation they have been currently. And they're talking to them about, being remorseful, understanding that they made a mistake, really getting a chance to reflect without, us passing any judgment, with us being open-minded and figuring out, okay, so how can we help this young person move to, the next step of being reintegrated into their school community if they have been suspended for 1 or 2 days, or, getting back on the right track. When we're thinking about some of the young people that come to our program, there's some relationship piece that comes into play. Some relationships have been broken. If this incident was involved with a school staff member or someone in their class. So we're really trying to equip this young person with some skills and tools so that when they go to school, if they're faced with a similar situation, we want to make sure that they're handling in the best way possible. And of course, we're not going to be there for every future incident, but it's really important to allow that young person to kind of sit down and reflect and go through their thought process of, well, how did I handle this situation? What did I take into account? What are my values and morals? And sometimes, young people, they don't think about that immediately. So help them think about the bigger picture is something we often have conversations with our young people about. So the way that this process would look, we receive a referral for this low-level offense that I told you guys about, and our case manager and our team will call the family to schedule their youth court hearing. So the youth court hearing takes place on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Everything we do is in an actual courtroom. So we're housed at the Newark Municipal Court. When they come in on their court date, they go through an intake process. So we're getting more information about the incident, you know, getting a feel for this young person. What goals do they have? Are they involved in any extracurricular activities? Does this family have any services in place? Can we, you know, link them to any services in the community? And that's a huge piece because we always want to make sure that we're not duplicating, you know, any services that a family has or burning a family out. We want to make sure that we're listening to, you know, what they need. And if they tell us that, you know, my child needs a mentor, then we want to be able to link them to the appropriate service. We also want to get some feedback as to what services they have in place and what's working for them and maybe what's not, so we can collaborate with, you know, those partners that they do have in their lives. And then they go inside for their youth court hearing. So, you know, our kids run the show. So our youth court members, they're trained in all the roles of an actual courtroom. So they play the judge, they play the community advocate, which would be similar to a prosecutor in a real case. They play the youth advocate, which is similar to a public defender. You have your jury foreperson and your jury and your bailiff. So all of those kind of roles are playing out in that courtroom during the case. And that young person is able to sit on the stand. The jury is asking them questions about, you know, of course, the incident, but also we want to make sure that that's not our main focus. You know, we want to focus on this young person as, you know, a member of the community, a lot of times a member of their school community, and really get a feel for what they need from us. One of the biggest things that's important to me when I'm thinking about, you know, my staff training our youth court members to be in such an important and powerful role, right? They're literally, in a sense, holding, you know, a young person's fate in their hands. Because if they're not asking the right questions, if we're not getting all of the information that we need to help this young person, then at some point, you know, we may face some disengagement for this young person. They may not be interested in a process. And unfortunately, then we have to go back to talk to that vice principal or the detective about, you know, this young person not completing the program. So it's really important that we're having conversation while this young person is in the courtroom during their youth court hearing about, you know, what they want the outcome to be. And that's a really important question, I think, that as adults, we have to, you know, ask young people when we're providing services to them. What do you want? You know, what can I do for you? And that's a question that our youth court members have adapted. What do you want the outcome of this hearing to be? And going over, you know, what our traditional sanctions are, which I'll explain in a little bit, but giving them a chance to have a say in, you know, this process. And that's powerful because a lot of times when our young people, you know, are in trouble, they made a mistake, you know, they're called into the office, having a parent-teacher conference, and, you know, they have adults in the room that's speaking over them. And, you know, sometimes where our frustrations really come into play, and that young person is not able to speak freely about, you know, this mistake or this offense that they have been involved in. So that's really important to us, that chance that this young person gets to tell their story from their side without anyone else kind of influencing what they have to say. After the hearing takes place, then our youth court members will go out and deliberate, and they figure out, you know, based on what this young person told us during their hearing, what's the most fair and appropriate sanctions that we could give them. So the sanctions would include community service, which we do all throughout the city. Community service is a big piece of our program because since we're based on restorative justice, that idea of giving back to the community that I harmed, whether it's the school community, the larger community. So we do throughout community service throughout the city, a lot of churches, food pantries. We've done volunteer work at after school programs, you know, other youth events that take place in the city. It could be one of the 3 workshops we facilitate on site. So it's goal setting, conflict resolution, and decision making. And these workshops are really designed to be discussion based. We're talking to a young person about, you know, when you're making a decision, what are you taking into account? What are your values? Let's start there. You know, what do you really value? Is family important? Is, you know, education, your reputation, acceptance, all of those things we're talking to them about. And then we're going through the process with them about how to make a decision. You know, tell us about a time you had to make a decision. What came into play for you? What were your options? And ultimately, what did you decide? How did that positively or negatively affect you, you know, based on the decision that you made? The goal setting workshop is kind of starting from scratch, you know, talking about where this young person is currently and where they want to go 5-10 years from now, and them kind of creating a picture for themselves. And then, you know, creating a short and long-term goal that they can attain, you know, during their process with us or even after. the conflict resolution workshop is talking to them about, what we do to contribute to conflict, how it escalates, how we can be a part of de-escalating conflict, who should we go to when we do have, a situation where there's conflict involved. And, our young people are able to talk with each other about situations that they have been involved in and really offer advice to each other. And that's the great thing about the workshops. They are, taking place in a group setting. So you may have a student that's 14 and they go to a high school across town, but similar in a sense that they've been brought to this program as an alternative, so they're able to share different experiences. It's also jury duty is another sanction that we have. So that student gets to sit in on another case and be a youth court member for the evening. So our jury foreperson is prepping this young person about, these are the questions that we ask based on, the case that we had this evening. Now this young person, maybe last week they came to us for their youth court hearing for maybe, truancy, and now they're getting to sit in on a case for maybe someone that has possession of a weapon and kind of see what it feels like to be on that other side, to ask questions. And it also, the feedback that we've gotten from the jury duty sanction is that, the students, they like what it feels like to be on the other side, to ask those questions, and they feel like they're able to connect with other young people in a sense. Another sanction would be a writing assignment. So an essay on a certain topic, giving them a chance to really sit down and reflect, a verbal apology in the courtroom, sometimes to their parent or caregiver. It can be a written apology where, they have to sit down and really reflect. And a big part of our sanctions are our community partners. So referring them out to mentoring programs and community programs. So, we're always making sure that we're abreast of all the resources that are available in the city, because when a family comes to us, whether during intake or, during testimony, we find out something else, we want to be able to connect that young person to the best resource possible. So sometimes it's, an after school program. Other times it's a grief counseling. So it just depends, of what that young person is telling us that they need, and any suggestions that our youth court members, sometimes they come to us and they say, Ms. Jasmine, I really think this young person can benefit from, being referred to the All-Stars Project of New Jersey. They're really into arts and theater, and their business development programs. So just thinking about, the partners that we have, and sometimes we're thinking about our youth court members who will come to this program because, sometimes they have an interest in criminal justice or the legal field, but sometimes they come to us and they have no idea, and they heard from a friend of a friend that this program takes place after school and it sounds cool, so I'm gonna apply to be a youth court member. So a lot of the times we're focusing on the respondent and the resources that we can provide them, but all the while our youth court members are receiving some of these great opportunities as well. So that's important to us, making sure that we're at the table with our community partners to figure out what resources are available for all of our young people that are in programming. After their youth court hearings, so they're leaving with these sanctions that were given, and then we're monitoring their compliance. So that's when we're, in communication with our detectives and our school staff members about, this person came to the youth court hearing, this is the sanctions, and we're, calling them, we're sending letters, reminding them that they have to come to community service on Saturday, or they have a workshop after school, and really, meeting the family where they are. We know that transportation is a big challenge sometimes in the city, and we want to make sure that we are paying attention to those things, our challenges for our young people. We've done workshops at schools, just to make it a little easier so that young person doesn't have to truck it all the way downtown Newark, too far from their school. So a lot of our programming has been shifted and going just based off of, what really the needs of the family and this young person are. And our partners, our school partners, sometimes they face some challenges and they want to refer cases to us. And they're like, wait a minute, where does this fit in our discipline policy? How do we make this work? And it's sometimes just us sitting at the table and say, listen, this is some of the other partnerships that we have with schools in the city. What does your discipline policy look like? And kind of working through where we would fit in with that particular school. And it looks different for everyone. And I think when we are making new partnerships with schools, that's something that we think is really important, that they figure out, their discipline policy and really how they want a restorative justice approach to kind of fit in that. And I know that was very long-winded, so please, if anyone has questions thus far, I'm open to answering them.
Yeah, no, that was a great overview, and there are a lot of questions that are coming in. I think one of the first ones and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but just how has your organization been able to link youth to services and community resources, particularly during COVID? And sort of what's the thought process as we look towards this new school year that question mark?
Yeah, I'll just give you kind of like a snippet of what we've been experiencing since March when we've been working remotely. Our spring calendar for youth court is always kind of jam-packed. So youth court takes place, I told you guys, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we had hearings scheduled up until the end of May already on our calendar when we started working remotely in March. When we had students that were actively completing, their sanctions in the program and the process. So, what do? We contacted, our referral sources, the detectives, the schools, to say, these are the cases that we currently had in completion. Let's figure out a way to get these students to complete their sanctions virtually. So we were doing virtual workshops with our students. Some of them had writing assignments to complete. We were really utilizing that as a check-in to see, exactly what resources we could be providing families during the pandemic. We are fortunate enough to be a part of Newark Community Solutions, the community court program here in New Jersey, and we have social workers that work in Newark Community Solutions. So we've been able to tap into a lot of resources that they have come across and really be able to link students and families to some resources, even something as simple of employment. That was a big thing that came up for some of our high school students that were completing the program. They were looking for employment around April. So we were able to kind of get a list of places that were hiring. And then also someone was applying to the military. So we were, sitting down. The workshop, of course, was about decision-making or goal setting, but, a part of that was really making a plan for this young person during a pandemic. After this is finished, when you are able to have some movement in the process, what's the first thing you're going to do? So it's been a lot of planning. And of course, everyone is in a space where this is something different for us. But we were kind of just utilizing our young people and the families that need resources to kind of drive us in the right direction of what they need.
Thank you. I'm going to see if Jeff, I see a question in the chat box, but I'm wondering if I unmute you, Jeff Dicker, if you would be open to asking your question. And welcome.
Welcome. Well, my question is, just to put in a background, New Jersey is absolutely the worst state in the nation with respect to having Black youth being incarcerated compared to white youth, whether Hispanic or not Hispanic. It's 30.6 according to the Sentencing Project, and it's gotten worse in the last 15 years compared to the past, as has it gotten worse throughout the country. The program you described, it sounds really cool. And my question is, to what extent are you taking a look at making sure that this program also doesn't have unintended consequences, such that it ends up, as a result, through the deferral or identification and sort of whatnot, that we aren't still adding to that pipeline, but in fact, trying to turn that around?
Absolutely. I mean, our approach has always been from the intervention perspective. So when we're thinking about restorative justice, we want to be that alternative to young people being arrested. And I mean, at the lower end of it, being suspended or even given detention for these low level offenses, things that we can have conversations with young people about to really try to turn them around. It's no secret that, the incarceration rate in New Jersey is pretty high. I think for us, we've been in a great place over the past couple of years because people are really starting to get it. We're throwing around this word of restorative justice and what this actually means. I think people are starting to understand and really want to implement these things into schools, getting more detectives on board with station house adjustments and exactly what it means to refer a young person and be able to divert them and not arrest them and process them, but send them to a community-based organization that provides services and resources for them. So I do think that we still have a ways to go, but I want to believe that we have been a part of some of those conversations that really kind of energize some of the movement that has happened, particularly in the city of Newark. I can't speak for the state of New Jersey. But I do want to say that there are a bunch of towns that have reached out to us about our programming and wanting to mimic some version of a restorative justice program or a youth court program. And we're excited to obviously, share all of our materials and things that we can provide in order for, to make this program replicated in other areas. We don't want to be the gatekeepers of a youth court program, so I think that's the important piece of it, us collaborating and figuring out, this works in Newark, but what would this look like in a town over? So that's important.
Can I just add something, Jennifer?
Sure.
And I just want to add something to the issue that Jeff raised. So while New Jersey is still very problematic in terms of the overrepresentation of Black kids in the system, I think people should be aware that there has been a lot done. So because of the Annie E. Casey Foundation coming to New Jersey and instituting the JDAI, or the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, which is a data-driven process by which people, again, all the stakeholders who touch a juvenile case, from the judge to the prosecutor to the public defender and everybody probation involved, look at the data and really looked at why are kids in detention, and really making sure that kids were not put back in detention for some minor violation, not showing up for court, not seeing their probation officer, et cetera. So since, I'd say over the past 15 years, we have reduced our detention populations in New Jersey and our secured facility populations in New Jersey, the detention by over 70%. And in fact, there have been 8 or 9 detention centers that have just closed in New Jersey, where they all were facing overcrowding issues at one point in time. They're not anymore. The other thing that's come out of that, and there's also been a lot of people who've worked towards some reform, including the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, the clinics at Rutgers, the Public Defender's Office, my office, the ACLU in Newark. Jasmine's been part of the Youth Justice Coalition. There's a lot of faith-based people. There were several pieces of legislation that have been put in place. One, which allowed kids who had been previously transferred to adult court now to come back down to the juvenile system, where they would get more services, both like mental health, education, and again, a lot more work to be done. But if you look at the secured facility population of our largest facility, which is Jamesburg, at some point had over 300 youth in it, is now down to 145, 150. Over 45 of those youth are youth that were in adult corrections that got moved back down to juvenile. So they could be a little bit older. And again, a lot of the kids in the youth, unfortunately, in these facilities have special education issues that did not get addressed, and maybe part of the reason why they wound up getting involved with the criminal justice system. But I do think there's regular meetings that occur where people are looking at the data, trying to continue to move kids out. The other thing, recent legislation, they tried to get more kids out of the secured facilities because of COVID, if they were being close to being released on probation. And starting in November, and this process I think is being instituted now because of COVID, they are trying to make sure that if kids can be released early, that they could and be put on probation, where we tended to make kids complete their full sentence and then be put on probation, which caused some kids to re-involve with the system. So the Juvenile Justice Commission was really behind this legislation. We have one of the few states that our parole board made the final decision, and now it's going to be split decision between the parole board and the Juvenile Justice Commission. They've gotten rid of some of the requirements of paying certain fines, which again, kids come out of the system and they have fines to pay, and that causes a problem because they don't have employment. So I'm not at all excusing, I understand the research from the Sentencing Project, but I think we have significantly reduced kids who are actually incarcerated in our state. There are 2 counties that I know of where the prosecutors actively push back on the school districts, Camden County and Middlesex County, and these juvenile prosecutors will not take complaints or referrals if they think it's something that the school could have handled. And that has really changed in the past 3 or 4 years. So I think we're going to see, as new data comes out, there is going to be an upswing. I also think there's certain schools now who, with their social workers, are trying to get kids who have whether it's just, past trauma, behavioral issues, they have problems at home, et cetera, really getting them engaged with our statewide behavioral health system. And people are trying to get kids engaged in yoga and meditation. And there's a program out there, Pause program, which I think I've heard some of the police chiefs say they've instituted or gotten a social worker to institute in the school, where you're really trying to teach kids the skill set that they can sort of pause and think how they're going to react, which again, diffuses certain situations that they might have misinterpreted when they have an interaction with another kid in the school. So I'm not trying to, again, minimize, we have a lot of work to do in New Jersey, but I think there's a lot of positives going on.
Thank you, Mary. Jasmine, a question came in, well, a lot of questions, that's the truth. But starting with how individuals can refer to your programs, but also how do school boards work with your program? And is there a process by which students who are in the HIB process are referred to you?
Yes, so our program, for a student to be referred, they have to either live or go to school in Newark. Hopefully that will be extended at some point. So live or go to school in Newark. And yes, we have had several cases that have been referred to us while a student was in the HIB process or just had a hearing, and they were also sent to Newark Youth Court along with some other resources.
For those of you who are asking what's an HIB process, that's New Jersey's harassment, intimidation, and bullying program in our school. So for those of you who are out of state and looking at me with confused looks, that's what that is. Another question that came in was regarding the courts, and are these open to the public? Can people participate as observers to see what this looks like in action?
Yes, so our youth court hearings are open to the public. We just ask that you schedule a time to come in with us. So email our staff and we'll let you know how many cases we have for that evening. We like to give the families notification if we do have visitors, just out of respect, but our hearings are open to the public.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going to invite, you see a lot of questions in the chat box, which is a little hard for me to keep scrolling. So if you have a question and you want to raise your virtual and or your physical hand, please do so. Jeff Dicker, did you have a follow-up question, Jeff?
Yes, I'm sorry. My follow-up question is more sort of somewhat of a comment more than anything. A lot of what's been going on, New Jersey has done tremendously with regards to basically putting the need for juvenile detention centers out of business. Wonderful. And in reality, it's also put the JJC, in terms of as it's currently operating, sort of raises lots of questions about it, especially considering right now about 60% of their population is 18 or over. We're mixing kids with adults. There's not many of them. They have fewer and fewer options because as the numbers get reduced and the kids have varying needs, the JJC is having a harder time responding to the very unique needs of each of the kids. And, I also believe, if you can comment with respect to some of this, is really sort of cultural. We are approaching kids as if they're living in suburbs in terms of the state of New Jersey. The family courts, the prosecutor's office, public defender, the juvenile probation departments. It understands the suburban youth culture. I don't think it clearly gets the urban culture and the culture of our Black youth and their families, which results in this overall disproportionate treatment of kids who are of color, especially the Black youth, and especially the Black youth, because it's much higher among that group than any other group with respect to it, that we still turn back to use, sort of incarceration as an approach with respect to it, and or just sort of labeling them and getting them involved. So if you can comment, Mary, a little bit more in relationship to that and what's going forward with respect to this.
Okay, I'd be happy to. So two things. One, actually under former Governor Christie, there was funding set aside to bond and build 2 or 3 very small facilities, because the goal was to close Jamesburg and close Hayes, which is the girls' facility, that are just outdated, much too big, and not appropriate anymore. So right now, my understanding is there were some disagreements in terms of where the facility should be built, and that's a whole long story. But the bottom line is there's supposed to be 2 72-bed facilities or 3 50-bed facilities. And the thought was these are going to be much more therapeutic, home-like settings. Again, under modeled by the Casey Foundation, looking at their, I think it's their Missouri model, where you have a lot of programming, a lot of educational services. So that is in the works. The other thing that Governor Murphy did sign about 2 years ago was to create a task force, which is supposed to continue to look at other reforms, and everything from station house adjustments, how we use that, how kids get charged, et cetera. And I've been told that that task force report should be coming out very shortly. And I'm hopeful that that will start to address more of the issues that you're talking about. I do think that one of the things we need to really get at is what you're talking about, the charges that are put on kids for behavioral issues, which are really discipline issues, or what I want to say, Jeff, you referred to as suburban behavior versus urban behavior, and yet we expect a different behavior of certain kids. I think, I don't want to paraphrase what you're saying, but that's my takeaway, right? That our system actually is looking to have your model suburban kid, and we're imposing that system.
I think it get beyond like the concept of like, if you go ahead and put a kid in detention, it's like, well, if the kid's able to return to their parents, sure. If they're returning to an aunt or uncle, no, they go to detention.
Well,
and oftentimes kids are being raised by their aunt and uncle more often in the urban areas than they are in the suburban areas.
right.
So those kinds of issues get played out where we are more often at each level of the system. It just disproportionately is against that kid who's Black who lives in the city.
So my understanding, and again, this is the JDAI model, right, is supposed to be looking at those cases. And there is a quarterly meeting that takes place with representatives from every county, where the Juvenile Justice Commission, the acting director now, Jennifer LeBaron, who is the data person, they're presenting that data and they're asking those questions.
Great.
Because I think for many kids, people did ask for just a parent, and instead they really should be making 2 other phone calls or say, who takes care of you? And then you find out it's the cousin or the aunt or the uncle. And I think people are much more aware of the fact that it may take a couple of phone calls to find that person, but that we need to find that person. So kids are not supposed to be in detention. And my understanding is one of the, I guess, unintended positive of COVID is that there are less kids being put in detention than ever before. And they are finding family because of the, COVID virus. But I think what's happening is people are adjusting the way they do it. So, okay.
At least one positive outcome from that.
Right. If you want to pick a positive. So I don't know, Jasmine, if you have any other thoughts.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, Mary, I think you covered it nicely. Thank you.
And just one other follow-up. What do you think about 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds in the JJC being mixed with the youth, younger kids?
So I think—
Because I don't think they're kids.
No, I think the new facilities will address some of that. But if you actually look at the stats on the JJC website, there's very few youth who are under the age of 16 or 17. And again, I'm not saying it's not a problem, but I think what you're going to see with the new facilities is it will be a different kind of environment. And that's
New Jersey is the only state that does this sort of mixture of adults with kids based upon their age of the crime, as opposed to we are atypical, I believe, in the country. Are we not?
That I can't comment, but I do know we also don't waive kids automatically to adult court like many other states do.
Yeah, we've got a lot better there.
That we do better, but as a result, you are going to get some of that mix. Because I know in some other states, if you're 16 or 15 and you commit a felony or a certain type of felony, you are automatically tried as an adult. And in New Jersey, there's a hearing process, and now they're bringing some of those back.
Yeah, I personally am against having a 20-year-old mixed with a 16-year-old in a correctional environment.
Understandable.
Jasmine, did you have any thoughts? I thought I saw you unmute yourself.
No, I did before. No, I just wanted to say, and I don't know if Mary mentioned this, there are specialized programming for those older population of young people. I know that there's a few things that's came out from the JJC in terms of, that older population in terms of services and different resources. So definitely understandable having those two populations mixed.
A couple of other questions have come in, and I just want to be mindful of the time as an hour goes by very quickly. But a couple individuals wanted to know what types of programs are you seeing that are similar in this, but perhaps out of state, other models that you're looking at, other programs that we can draw from or that people in other states can look at?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of different types of models for like the youth court, teen court, student courts. Those are just some of the names. There's a website called the Global Youth Justice. It's kind of like the hub for peer courts and teen court programs across the country. So I would suggest looking on that website. It actually has a breakdown of every state and what similar programs they have, whether it's, in a school or a community-based or court-based program for young people. So it has a lot of great information. Under our organization, the Center for Court Innovation, we are based out of New Jersey and New York. So there are 5 other youth courts that operate in New York.
Great, thank you so much. As we start to think about what's next, people would love to hear both your, Jasmine, and your perspective, Mary, on what's needed. What's needed in terms of policy, what's needed in terms of community education, systems, et cetera, to really think about how we address youth and work with them and sort of dismantle the school to prison pipeline, if you will.
Yeah, so I think for us, in terms of where we are as an organization, our programming has gone through kind of like a rebranding process, and it just kind of encompasses all the things over the years we've been working on. So Youth Court now going on its 11th birthday, coming in November, we're starting to think about our programming in terms of transformative justice. So outside of Youth Court, what have we been doing over the years that really provide services and really get to the needs of young people in our community, whether that's college readiness programming, mentoring, providing some solid restorative justice programming. We're going to be rolling out peace circles as another kind of menu, adding to our menu of options for restorative justice programming. And our focus is really civic engagement, development, and providing opportunity to young people. I think for us, being a part of these conversations with our community-based organizations, schools and police about, as an organization, what should we be doing? What can we be providing to the city? That's really important to us. And I think our programming has shifted based on the needs of the community and what, as an organization, we have expertise on. And it's definitely, restorative justice programming and providing these opportunities to young people. So of course, we're trying to plan, starting September, what this will look like for the school year, because we know that we won't actually be back in the courtroom providing, this in-person service. And the youth court hearings, we are going to be rolling out virtual programming where we're doing our hearings virtually, training our members on what it's like to facilitate a peace circle and doing those things virtually. This time has forced us to be very creative, and we're thinking about, even, the day that we do get back in person, these barriers that I talked about earlier about transportation and students getting to the courthouse. How can we, set up shop in our office on a computer, but allow this young person to still participate in the alternative, via technology at their home or at the school. So we're really thinking about, how our programming will shift, and then really trying to figure out, what would be the next step in terms of, getting this program other places. And I know I said earlier, we've had conversations with other towns about the possibility. And I welcome you guys to please email me, our organization. So I know that I said that we're a program of Newark Community Solutions. Newark Community Solutions is a project of the Center for Court Innovation. We're based out of New York. So we have a technical assistance team that, starts community court projects and youth court programming, throughout the state and in New York. So I welcome you guys to email me if you are, not in New Jersey and you're looking to start this type of programming, or if you are in New Jersey, we would be happy to set up a call and just kind of figure out what you're looking for, how we can help to provide some resources for you guys. And I know I saw a few questions about charter schools and schools. Please email me so we can kind of chat about, how I can be of any assistance or point you in the right direction.
So a couple other things I think that have to happen on a policy level or a legal level. In New Jersey, there are these memorandums of understanding that get signed between the school districts, law enforcement, and our Department of Children and Families. And one of the things that I'm involved in a statewide committee, what they did is they went through this document that they keep adding to every year that has a lot of regulations and obligation to it. And they reorganized it so schools would know what things they absolutely had to refer to law enforcement and what things that they had the discretion. And trying to really work with schools to say, you know what, you don't need to involve law enforcement on certain things, which would be what I was referring to before as bad behavior. The other thing is, I think to the extent that we can identify kids who have learning issues that they might find to be frustrating and cause them to overreact or act out, and get them the services they need either through special education or some other type of coping mechanisms. I think the earlier we can identify those kids, I think that will help, because as I mentioned before, you do have an overrepresentation of kids of disability who wind up getting referred to law enforcement because either their disability is not understood or it's misinterpreted what happens. And I think to the extent that any people who are listening to this, if you're involved with your child study team or you work for a school district, to the extent you can encourage school administrators to incorporate some type of restorative justice program in your school, whether it be a youth court like Jasmine's talked about, or just other restorative justice type programs, and there are a lot out there. I think that would help tremendously in terms of teaching skills to youth, but also avoiding this, this funnel that is created through the discipline. I think that would be helpful.
Thank you both. We have time for one more question, I think. We might be cutting it a little close, but Pat, you had a question that came in, and I'm going to see if I can find you. And I'd love to bring you online if you'd like to ask your question. Oh, there I see I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. Pat?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone.
If you could tell us where you're from, and then we'd love to hear your question.
Oh, yes. I'm from Trenton, New Jersey, a native of Philly, and I'm a licensed social worker. So my question is, I'm hearing about the wonderful innovation programs that are out there, and kudos to those that are getting those started and getting those going. However, when we think about gentrification and de-investment, for example, that have been in the city plans for years. When I go into Brooklyn now, I don't even know Bed-Stuy. I didn't even know that the plans have been in place for like maybe 15, 20 years, and it's a different place now. So I'm saying a lot of plans are in place that the public is not aware of. With that being said, is the prison pipeline, and anyone can answer this, a similar plan for African American males to become a labor force for prisons through mass incarceration? So if that is a plan or some type of systemic plan, then the programs they're great, but you know, I don't know if this going to be a diversion from a master plan. So I'm hoping I'm clear on that. But we have seen so much inequality and so many programs out there to stop the inequality, so many sensitivities to stop the inequality, and it goes on and on and on. Maybe because it's systematic, as we know now. So that's just my question. I'm hoping someone can answer that for me.
Thank
Mary,
you,
I'm not
Pat.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure, Mary, if you can speak to the bigger picture. Pat, I do want to say that just thinking back to when our program started and the way that we've built partnerships with the city and with community members, a big chunk of our programming has been successful because we've gone to community members and asked for feedback about what's working, what needs to be done, and really sat at the table with some community members about, you know, plans and things that are taking place in the city. So that's always been at the forefront of our work, is speaking to community members and our clients and young people about things that they need and what we can be doing as an organization. Of course, you know, we're a small part of, you know, a larger system. So I can't speak as to, you know, what those plans actually are. I can only speak from our organization. And at the forefront is always, you know, our clients and the people that we're serving, and making sure that our programming aligns with those needs of community members. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
And I don't know that I have an answer either. I will say in New Jersey, we've just instituted a huge bail reform effort to try to get people out of jail with, I think, a lot of success. I also, I do think the smaller programs like the youth court and some of the other restorative justice things that are going on are a way of really educating people in the community about the issues. And I think what I'm finding is there are people who are seeing the injustice and they want to do something. And I think there is some momentum building. And I have seen it with some of the prosecutors, where I was at one meeting, again, this was Middlesex County, and he brought in the schools, he brought in the police officers, and brought in a gentleman who was retired but had reformed a system in Philadelphia, and a judge from Clayton County in Georgia, who were very clear in terms of how you could change what you were doing and how you can intervene, and that there was no need to really charge these kids. And I think they are working on it, and it's a process. I think New Jersey is also trying to develop people who want to stay in the juvenile system, and that they get training and a career path in the juvenile system, so they really learn how to interact with juveniles. Unfortunately, right now, we have adult corrections officers sometimes in these systems, and they don't really know how to interact with the juveniles. So I think those things will help. In terms of Trenton, I don't know, I would encourage you, Pat, to get involved with the Smith Family Foundation. They are a local foundation in Trenton. I think they're doing some good things. And so to the extent all the people who are participating on this call, whether you're in New Jersey or not, I would encourage you to get involved in some program where, and I'm sure a lot of you are, so I shouldn't make that, but to the extent you can encourage people that you work with to start looking at restorative justice practices, I think that will start to change the mindset. But beyond that, Pat, I don't have any miracle answer for you.
Thank you. Thank you. That sounds good. Thank you.
I wish we did. Thank you, Pat, for that that last question, and for all of our now lingering thoughts and sort of pondering of what we're going to do next. And we are right at 1 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much, Mary and Jasmine, for leading this conversation, and for all of you who have joined us. I think something that I really took away from today was just the need to continue these conversations, to start talking about what restorative justice looks like, to be talking about how race and reconciliation are important. And I think, Mary, you really hit it on the head, that there is a tide that seems to be changing, and people are invested and want to do this work. And I think it's important for all of us, for social workers who are on this call to continue to lead the conversation and to look at programs and models that are doing really great work. Look to their successes. How can we model them in different communities, and how can we roll out programs that are going to meet people where they're at, and really make sure that teens and everyone are getting the support that they need, versus just being locked up.
Thank you.
So today is just one of many conversations that we are having in our race responsibility and reconciliation series. And for those of you who have joined us for many of these calls, thank you. We will continue the conversation with exceptional leaders like Mary and Jasmine, and I look forward to more of them with you. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank
Have a good
you.
day.